right, this is part 3. We ended up with the renal system at urethra. So we're ready to start at artery, which is a circulatory system. An artery is a tube that carries blood in the body. These tubes carry oxygenated blood away from the heart and to the other parts of the body. When they say oxygenated, they mean that oxygen has been put into the blood by the lungs. That's what your lungs do. Air goes into your mouth or nose, down your trachea, into your bronchial tubes. Those bronchial tubes get smaller and smaller, and they end in what's called the alveoli, which we'll be at later. But when they get to the very end, there's a little few molecules of oxygen that gets put in the blood in the lungs. Okay, the next one would be a vein. Same thing, circulatory, same thing, tubes carrying blood in the body. These tubes carry oxygen empty blood back to the heart and lungs. So the arteries take the blood from the heart and lungs out to the body to deliver oxygen and nutrients. And then the veins carry the blood back to be reoxygenated and pumped by the heart so it continues to move. It's like a giant system. The next one is the spleen. It's also circulatory. It's a small round organ on your left side sticking out from behind the stomach. I drew one on this picture. Let me lift this up a little bit so you can see it. It's kind of right there. I couldn't find a diagram that had the spleen in it that had the other stuff I wanted, so I just drew it in. It's kind of right there. It says a small organ on the left side sticking out from behind your stomach. It stores blood. You can live without it. If it ruptures, you can bleed out. So if you're in a car accident or a baseball hits you in the side, any large contusion like that can rupture the spleen, and it can bleed out quickly. It can bleed out very slowly, and you'll go for hours and not, and all of a sudden you'll realize something's wrong. But usually when you rupture it, they remove it. So you can live without your spleen. The heart is a circulatory and muscular system. That's because the heart is a muscle. It says it's in the center of the chest, a bit to the right, inside the rib cage. It is a muscle that pumps blood so it travels through the body. The heart is a anatomy unit all on its own. It's got 4 chambers, and they work, and it's got valves that allow the blood through one direction and not the other. It's quite a work of art. But the heart, obviously, you know where that is. In my diagram, it would actually be kind of behind the trachea, right in the center of the chest. The trachea is respiratory. It's a tube that goes from the nose and mouth to the bronchial tubes in the lungs. And it says, carries air into the chest cavity, has a flap at the top to keep food and liquid from going down into the lungs. Your swallowing motion closes the flap. Matter of fact, when you swallow food, it actually goes over the trachea, because the trachea, if you feel your throat, the hard tube right in front is where your air goes down. Your esophagus actually goes behind that, so your food actually goes over the opening of your trachea. Obviously, if your food went into your trachea, you'd start coughing, and it could cause pneumonia. So when you swallow, there's a flap called the epiglottis that closes the top of the trachea. If you've ever swallowed food and it, what you call, went down the wrong way, that means that your epiglottis wasn't quite closed. That usually happens when food goes to the back of your mouth without you really meaning for it to. Sometimes you drink water and it goes back before you realize it's going back there, and since you haven't done the actual swallow process, the epiglottis hasn't closed, and food and liquid can go into your trachea, which will make you cough. It's your body's way of protecting you from getting foreign objects or liquids in your lungs. Okay, the lungs, respiratory and circulatory. They're respiratory because they take in air, and they're circulatory because they put oxygen into the blood. You have two of them, one on each side of the chest cavity. They are like balloons. They need inflated and can collapse. So you have your trachea right here we just talked about, and your lungs. And again, your lungs are like a balloon, and they can collapse. And there's a cavity around your lungs that actually can get filled with blood if your heart's not working very well, and that puts pressure on your lungs, and it makes it so the lungs have a hard time inflating. That usually happens to, elderly folks. But it says air goes into the trachea and through the bronchial tubes. The little compartments in the lungs called alveoli put oxygen into a tiny bit of blood. The next one's the diaphragm. It's respiratory and muscular. It's a muscle that goes horizontal across the bottom of the chest cavity. This muscle contracts or shortens to push air out of the lungs and expands or lengthens to drag air into the lungs. So in this picture, it's showing it right here. Again, it's a muscle. Some people that get paralyzed from the neck down have to have oxygen because that muscle is paralyzed too, and they would not be able to breathe. The bronchial tubes or bronchi is respiratory. It's tubes that split off at the trachea and go into the lungs. These tubes split off several times, getting smaller and smaller, so the amount of air in one alveoli is very small. Bronchitis is an infection here. So where the trachea branches off, we call those bronchial tubes, and bronchitis is an infection in those tubes. Bronchitis can work into pneumonia for obvious reasons. You're right down there by the lungs. Okay. The hypothalamus, it's endocrine. The endocrine system is a system of glands. The word right here, if you're not sure what I just said. A gland is an organ that secretes or squirts out some chemical that helps your body in some way. It's a gland in the center of the brain, literally in the center. You'd have to cut your head all open to get to it. A gland that controls body temperature, thirst, hunger, and other homeostatic systems. You may not remember the word homeostatic, but it's one of your vocab words. It means how your body keeps things steady. When you're cold, you shiver. When you're hot, you sweat. Those kinds of things. When you have a lot of liquid in your body, you need to go to the restroom. When you're not drinking a lot, your body holds water. It's trying to keep homeostasis on the amount of water. All that has to do with the hypothalamus. And that is the end of our notes. So make sure you've got them all written down. If you don't, go back through the videos.